Today we are going to be going through everything you need to know about chocolate ganache so that you never fail at making one again, including how to fix things if they go wrong. So ganache is basically a combination of chocolate and cream. Now before you make a ganache, the type of chocolate and cream that you use is important. Now when it comes to the chocolate, the best type to use is a curvature chocolate, which contains a higher cocoa butter percentage compared to regular chocolate, which allows it to melt easier and it also gives you a shinier ganache. Curvature chocolate can be a little bit expensive though, so the good news is that you can also get away with making a ganache with a good quality chocolate bar that you'd buy at, your supermarket. And although you can technically make a ganache with compound chocolate, it's the only chocolate that I would recommend not using because it sets very firmly and it also just doesn't taste as good. Now when it comes to the cream, you can technically use any cream, but I would recommend using a cream that has a fat percentage of about 34% or higher. Okay, now let's talk about the difference between dark milk or white chocolate ganache. So they're all made using chocolate and cream, except the ratios are different. Now I know using ratios can be a little bit intimidating, but I'm going to try and explain it in a simple way, hopefully. Now the most common type of chocolate used to make a ganache is a dark chocolate, which contains a cocoa solid percentage of kind of anywhere between 35 to 60%. Now the ratio of chocolate to cream to use for a simple dark chocolate ganache, which can be used to frost or fill cakes or as a thick glaze, is a 1:1 ratio. And what this means is that you'll use an equal amount of chocolate to cream. So for example, if I use 100 grams of dark chocolate, then I'll want to use 100 grams of cream. Now to demonstrate how our dark chocolate ganache is made, you want to first chop up your chocolate into small pieces so that they melt easier. I'm using 150 grams of 50% dark chocolate, and I'll also be using 150 grams of cream to give me that 1:1 ratio. Next, you want to add your chopped up chocolate to a heat-proof bowl and set that aside for now. And in the meantime, you're going to gently warm up your cream over a low heat until it starts to gently bubble. You do not want to overheat this, otherwise you may burn your cream as well as your chocolate. Once that's done, pour the hot cream over the chocolate and just make sure all of the chocolate is under the cream. And then you just want to let that sit for about 5 minutes to allow the chocolate to melt. Once ready, you want to use either a whisk or spatula to gently begin mixing from the middle, and everything should slowly come together into a nice glossy ganache. You just want to be careful not to whisk too quickly because we don't want to incorporate any air into our ganache, so just nice and slow. So once done, you should have a nice silky smooth ganache like this, and if for some reason you don't and you have a few specks of chocolate, then you can use an immersion blender to bring it together as well. Just again, don't overblend and keep the immersion blender on the bottom of the bowl because we don't want it to incorporate too much air into our ganache. So at this point, you can just let your ganache cool down a little and then go ahead and use it to fill cupcakes, use it as a glaze, or even top, ice cream. Or you can set it aside for at least 10 hours or so to firm up and then use it as a frosting or whatever else. Now, when letting it cool, you want to cover the top with some cling wrap and make sure that the cling wrap is touching the top of the ganache, and this will just prevent a skin from forming as it cools. Now, you just want to leave this at room temperature to set, or you can pop it into the fridge, but just keep in mind it will be quite firm when you first take it out. So about 10 hours later, this is what my dark chocolate ganache looks like. It's super smooth and has a wonderful creamy texture to it. Now when it comes to milk chocolate ganache, the ratio of chocolate to cream is going to be different because milk chocolate doesn't have as much cocoa solids as dark chocolate, which means we're going to need less cream. So the ratio that I like to use is a 1.5:1 ratio of chocolate to cream. So for example, with this milk chocolate ganache that I made earlier, I used 240 grams of chocolate and 160 grams of cream. So after setting for about 10 hours, this is the consistency of my milk chocolate ganache. Now when it comes to white chocolate, it actually doesn't contain any cocoa solids in it. It only has cocoa butter. Because of this, we need even less cream to get a nice spreadable white chocolate ganache. So the ratio that I like to use is a 2.5:1 ratio, meaning that we're using 2.5 times as much chocolate than cream. So for example, with this white chocolate ganache I made earlier, I used 180 grams of white chocolate and 72 grams of cream. And about 10 hours later, this is what my white chocolate ganache looks like. So that is our 3 basic ganaches done, which all give us kind of like a spreadable consistency with different ratios based on the type of chocolate that we're using. Now, an important thing to note here is that different brands of chocolate will also give you different results. So if your ganache comes out a little bit thicker or a little bit thinner than mine, it doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with your ganache. It just means that your chocolate may be slightly different to the one that I'm using. And so you may need to just slightly adjust your ratios based on what you want to use your chocolate ganache for. Now, let's go back to dark chocolate ganache since that's the most popular ganache. So let's say I didn't want a spreadable ganache. I wanted either a thicker ganache, which could be piped, or a thinner ganache, which could be whipped into a delicious whipped cream. Now, for the thicker pipeable ganache, I would bump up my chocolate ratio to now have a 2-to-1 ratio as opposed to a 1-to-1 ratio, which we made earlier. So in this case, you would have twice the amount of dark chocolate compared to cream. To demonstrate, I'm using 200 grams of dark chocolate and 100 grams of cream for this thicker ganache, and I'm using the exact same method as earlier. So chop up your chocolate into small pieces, heat up the cream just until it starts to gently bubble, and then pour it over the chocolate. And then about 5 minutes later, gently stir until it comes together. So you can see here off the bat the ganache is already thicker in consistency than the 1-to-1 ratio we made earlier. And now you just want to cover the top with cling wrap, make sure the cling wrap is touching the top of the ganache, and then let it set at room temperature for about 10 hours or so. Now once set, you can see that we have a much thicker ganache here, which is going to be great for, frosting or piping where you need it to be super stable. Now the only problem is here in New Zealand at the moment, it is super cold, and so my ganache has set super firmly. So, you can't pipe with this consistency. So what you want to do is just pop this in the microwave for about 10 seconds and then give it a little mix. And then if it's still super firm, give it another 10 seconds and mix again. And this should bring it to a nice pipeable consistency. This 2-to-1 ratio is also great for using on cakes which are going to be covered with fondant because it's super stable. Now on the other hand, for a much lighter ganache which can be whipped into a delicious whipped cream, you want to use much less chocolate compared to cream. So I like to go with a 1-to-3 ratio of chocolate to cream, which means we're using 3 times more cream than we are chocolate. So with this example here, I'm using 150 grams of dark chocolate and 375 grams of cream. And again, I'm making it in exactly the same way as I made the others, except one step is slightly different. So once the chocolate has been sitting in the cream for a few minutes, instead of using a spatula or whisk to mix it together, I like to use an immersion blender. Because there's much less chocolate, I feel it doesn't come together as well if you're not using an immersion blender. Now before you whip this ganache, you need to let it completely cool in the fridge. So I'm covering the top with cling wrap and again making sure the cling wrap is touching the top of the ganache and then letting it sit in the fridge for at least a couple of hours. Once it's set, you can see that it's a much thicker liquid now, and now you can use a hand whisk or a hand mixer to whip it together until you reach stiff peaks. And now you have the most incredibly delicious whipped chocolate ganache frosting, which is basically an incredibly delicious chocolate whipped cream. Now, what happens if you make a ganache and it splits or becomes grainy like this? Now, this usually happens if you've overheated your cream and it's burnt your chocolate. When chocolate is overheated, it seizes up and doesn't melt as easily, which is the most probable cause of your grainy ganache. What overheating can also do is cause your ganache to split because the oils start to separate. Now, 2 ways that you can fix this is to either gently reheat your ganache over a double boiler and keep stirring and it should slowly come back together. And if that doesn't work, then you can also add in some more cream, about a tablespoon at a time, and you just want to keep mixing and it should slowly bring it back together. So that is it, guys. I hope you learned a little bit more about chocolate ganache. I will have all the different ratios for the different types of ganaches on my blog, and I'll see you in the next video.